The wind howled through Sonora, California, like a wounded animal, carrying dust and broken dreams across the main street, as Katherine Zimmerman clutched her worn leather satchel to her chest, watching her own family climb into their wagon without so much as a backward glance. The year was 1873, and at 20 years old, Katherine had just become as good as invisible to the people who had raised her. "Papa, please," her voice cracked, but Benjamin Zimmerman's shoulders only stiffened as he flicked the reins, urging the horses forward. Her mother, Elizabeth, sat rigid beside him, eyes fixed straight ahead as though her only daughter had already ceased to exist. The wagon pulled away, leaving Katherine standing alone outside Parker's General Store as the sunset painted the sky in cruel shades of orange and pink. The few townspeople still out at dusk averted their eyes, pretending not to notice her abandonment. She knew what they were thinking, what rumors they'd heard, that Katherine Zimmerman had been caught in a compromising position with the banker's son, that she'd refused to marry him when offered the chance to save her reputation, that she was ruined now, and her God-fearing family had done the only respectable thing by cutting her loose. What no one knew was the truth that William Parker had cornered her in the storeroom, that she'd fought him off, that his accusations were meant to cover his own misdeeds. But in Sonora, a man's word carried more weight than a woman's tears, especially when that man's father controlled the town's money. Night was falling fast, and with it came the bone-deep chill of the Sierra foothills in autumn. Katherine had nowhere to go, no money beyond the few dollars sewn into the lining of her dress, and nothing but the contents of the hastily packed satchel her sister had slipped to her when no one was looking. The rusty Spur saloon across the street glowed with lamplight, laughter spilling from its swinging doors. Katherine hesitated. Decent women didn't enter such establishments, but decent women weren't abandoned by their families either. With a deep breath, she straightened her spine and crossed the dusty street, pushing through the saloon doors before her courage failed her. The cacophony hid her first piano music, raucous laughter, the clink of glasses. Then the smells: whiskey, tobacco, perfume. Conversation faltered as heads turned toward her, and Katherine felt her cheeks burn as men's eyes raked over her modest blue dress. She'd never felt more out of place in her life. "Well, well," drawled a voice to her left. "Looks like the Zimmerman girls decided to join the sinners." William Parker lounged against the bar, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand and a cruel smile on his lips. Katherine took a step backward, ready to flee, when a deep voice cut through the momentary hush. "Madam, you're welcome to join us." She turned toward the sound and found herself looking at a table in the corner where a tall man in a worn duster sat with two companions. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed black hat, but she could see the steady blue of his eyes even from where she stood. He gestured to an empty chair at their table. "Sit with us," he said simply, ignoring the murmurs that rippled through the saloon. Something in his direct gaze gave her courage. Without looking back at Parker, Katherine crossed the room, conscious of every eye upon her. Up close, she could see that the cowboy was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 28 or so. His face was weathered from the sun, a thin scar running along his jawline. The two men flanking him were clearly trail companions, one older with graying temples, the other barely older than Katherine herself. "Thank you," she said quietly as she took the offered seat. "Owen Lawson," the cowboy said, touching the brim of his hat. "These are my partners, Jack Harmon and Teddy Walsh, Katherine Zimmerman." "We know who you are, Miss Zimmerman," Owen said. "Hard not to in a town this size. Seems to me you might be in need of a meal and some friendly faces tonight." Before she could answer, a woman in a red dress materialized at their table, eyebrows raised in surprise at Katherine's presence. "Martha," Owen nodded to the woman, "Miss Zimmerman will be joining us for supper. Could you bring her whatever's hot from the kitchen?" "Of course, Mr. Lawson," Martha replied, curiosity evident in her voice. As she walked away, Katherine found her voice. "I can't pay you for the meal, Mr. Lawson. I have very little money." Something flickered in Owen's eyes, not pity, but a kind of understanding that made Katherine's throat tight. "No need," he said. "We're celebrating tonight. Sold a herd of cattle for a fair price, and I always believe good fortune should be shared." The older man, Jack, nodded. "Owen here has a soft spot for strays, human or animal. You should see the three-legged dog he keeps at the ranch. Tobias is the best cattle dog I've ever had." Owen defended himself good-naturedly. Then to Katherine, "Don't mind Jack. He likes to think he's funny." For the first time that day, Katherine felt the ghost of a smile touch her lips. As Martha returned with a plate of steaming beef stew and fresh bread, Katherine realized how hungry she was. She hadn't eaten since morning, when her father had summoned her to his study and pronounced her dead to the family. She'd been too sick with shock to think of food after that. "Thank you," she said again, trying to maintain some semblance of the manners her mother had drilled into her, even as she wanted to devour the food in unladylike haste. "Eat," Owen said simply. "Then we'll talk about what comes next." Katherine paused with her spoon halfway to her mouth. "Next." "A woman alone at nightfall in Sonora has few options, none of them good," Owen stated bluntly. "I imagine you've got nowhere to go tonight." Shame burned her cheeks, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "My family has disowned me over false accusations, but I will find work. I can sew, keep accounts, teach children, all respectable occupations," Owen agreed. "But you won't find a position tonight, and no decent boarding house will take you in without references or a husband." "I don't have a husband," Katherine said, a hint of defiance creeping into her voice. Something that might have been approval flickered in Owen's eyes. "No, I don't imagine you do." He leaned forward. "Here's what I propose, Miss Zimmerman. My ranch is about 10 miles outside of town. I've got a small cabin that used to belong to the former ranch manager. It's empty now, but it's clean and secure. You can stay there while you figure out your next move. In exchange, perhaps you could help with the ranch accounts. As Jack will tell you, numbers aren't my strong suit." Jack snorted. "That's putting it mildly. Man can track a steer through a blizzard but can't add 2 and 2 without taking off his boots." Katherine looked between the men, searching for some hidden motive, some trick. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Owen was quiet for a moment, his fingers tapping lightly on the scarred wooden table. "Let's just say I recognize injustice when I see it." From across the saloon, William Parker's voice rose, deliberately loud. "Looks like the Zimmerman whore didn't waste any time finding new protectors." Owen's face hardened, but before he could respond, Katherine laid a hand on his arm. "Please don't. He's trying to provoke a fight." Owen studied her face, then nodded slightly. "You're probably right, but that doesn't mean we have to listen to him." He stood, tossing some coins on the table. "Jack, Teddy, I think we're done here. Miss Zimmerman, are you ready to leave?" Katherine glanced at her half-eaten meal, then at Parker's smirking face across the room. The decision wasn't difficult. "Yes, Mr. Lawson, I believe I am." As they left the saloon, Katherine could feel the weight of stares on her back, could almost hear the whispers that would race through town by morning. The Zimmerman girl, leaving with 3 cowboys. Her reputation, already in tatters, would be beyond redemption now. Outside, the night air was crisp, stars appearing in the clear autumn sky. Owen led the way to where 4 horses were hitched outside the general store. Katherine stopped short when she realized the implications. I don't ride, Mr. Lawson." Owen raised an eyebrow. Never. My father didn't consider it a necessary skill for a lady. Something that might have been amusement quirked the corner of Owen's mouth. Well, Miss Zimmerman, I'm afraid it's a necessary skill tonight, unless you'd prefer to walk 10 miles in the dark. Before she could respond, he whistled softly, and a massive black horse stepped forward, nudging Owen's shoulder. This is Midnight. He's steady as they come. You'll ride with me. Katherine hesitated, eyeing the enormous animal. I won't let you fall, Owen said quietly. After a moment's consideration, Katherine nodded. What choice did she have? With surprising gentleness, Owen helped her mount, then swung up behind her. The closeness of him, the solid warmth of his chest against her back, his arms reaching around her to take the reins made her breath catch. She'd never been this close to a man before, and despite the propriety of the situation, she couldn't help feeling that this, too, would have scandalized her parents. Hold tight to the saddle horn, Owen instructed as the horses started forward, Jack and Teddy falling in behind them. As they rode out of Sonora, Katherine caught a glimpse of light from the window of her family's home on the edge of town. For a moment, she thought she saw a face, her little sister, Emma, perhaps watching from behind the curtain. Then they rounded a bend in the road and the house disappeared from view. Are you all right? Owen asked after they'd ridden in silence for some time. Katherine realized she'd been sitting rigidly, afraid to lean back against him. She forced herself to relax slightly. Yes, just. It's been an overwhelming day. I imagine so, he replied. If you don't mind my asking what happened with your family. Sonora's a small town and rumors spread like wildfire, but they're rarely the full truth. Katherine was quiet for so long that Owen thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible above the steady hoofbeats. William Parker tried to force himself on me in the storeroom of his father's shop last week. I fought him off and ran. When I told my father, he didn't believe me. Then yesterday, William told everyone I'd offered myself to him and became angry when he refused me. Her voice hardened. My father chose to believe him over me. He said I'd brought shame to the family and gave me until sundown today to pack my things and leave. Owen's hands tightened on the reins. And your mother? She hasn't spoken a word to me since my father's decision. Katherine's voice was flat now, emotionless. My brothers followed his lead. Only my sister Emma tried to help, but she's only 16. There was little she could do. They rode in silence for another mile, the only sounds the creak of leather and the soft huffing of the horses. Parker's lying, Owen said finally. Anyone with eyes can see that. Katherine twisted slightly to look up at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. How can you be so sure? In the moonlight, she could see the hard line of his jaw, the steady blue of his eyes. Because I've met men like William Parker before. Men who think they're entitled to take whatever they want, then blame others when they can't have it. And because I've watched you in town over the years, Miss Zimmerman. You've always been kind, even to those most people ignore. People like that don't lie about something so serious. Katherine turned forward again, blinking back unexpected tears. After a day of accusations and disbelief, Owen Lawson's simple faith in her character felt like water in a desert. Thank you, she whispered. They crested a hill, and suddenly the valley opened up before them, bathed in moonlight. In the distance, Katherine could make out the darker shapes of buildings, a large house, a barn, smaller outbuildings nestled against the protective curve of the foothills. Raven Creek Ranch, Owen said, a note of pride in his voice. It's not much, but it's home. As they drew closer, Katherine could see that the ranch was larger than she'd initially thought. The main house was a substantial 2-story structure with a wide porch. Several corrals stood empty in the moonlight, and beyond them stretched fenced pastures where dark shapes cattle. she assumed were barely visible. They dismounted in front of the barn, Katherine stumbling slightly as her feet touched the ground. Her legs felt strange after the long ride, and she was grateful for Owen's steadying hand on her elbow. "Jack, would you and Teddy see to the horses?" Owen asked. "I'll show Miss Zimmerman to the cabin." Jack nodded, taking Midnight's reins. "Come on, boy," he murmured to the horse. Then to Katherine. "Welcome to Raven Creek, Miss Zimmerman. It's not a fancy place, but it's peaceful. Thank you, Mr. Harmon." Katherine picked up her satchel, suddenly aware of how little she had: a few changes of clothes, her mother's Bible, a small framed photograph of her family, and the $63 Emma had managed to give her. It wasn't much to start a new life with. Owen led her along a well-worn path that curved away from the main house. After a few hundred yards, they came to a small but sturdy cabin nestled under a stand of oak trees. He produced a key from his pocket and unlocked the door, then stepped back to let her enter first. The cabin was simple: one main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area with a cast iron stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed against one wall. A second, smaller room was visible through an open doorway. Despite its simplicity, the cabin was clean and solid, with braided rugs on the plank floor and curtains at the windows. "As I said, it's not much," Owen said, lighting a lamp on the table. The warm glow illuminated the room, making it feel almost cozy. "But the roof doesn't leak, and the stove works well. The smaller room has a washstand and some storage." Katherine set her satchel on the table, overwhelmed by the day's rapid changes. That morning, she had awakened in her childhood bedroom. Tonight, she was standing in a strange cabin with a man she barely knew, her entire life upended. Owen seemed to sense her distress. "I'll bring you some firewood and get the stove going. There's a well just behind the cabin and plenty of supplies in the kitchen. Tomorrow we can talk more about arrangements, but for now you should rest." "Mr. Lawson," Katherine said as he turned to leave, "I still don't understand why you're helping me." Owen paused in the doorway, his expression thoughtful. 8 years ago, I was accused of stealing horses in a town over in Nevada. The real thief was the sheriff's nephew, but that didn't matter much to the men who were ready to hang me." His hand unconsciously touched the thin scar along his jawline. "A stranger stepped in, proved my innocence. He told me that someday I'd have a chance to do the same for someone else." He shrugged slightly. "I guess today's that day." Before Katherine could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with her thoughts in the quiet cabin. She sank into one of the chairs, suddenly exhausted. Through the open door, she could see Owen crossing to a woodpile near the barn, his tall figure outlined against the night sky. What would tomorrow bring? She had no idea, but for the first time since her father's pronouncement that morning, Katherine felt a small flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, this wasn't the end of everything, but the beginning of something entirely new. When Owen returned with an armload of firewood, Katherine had composed herself. She watched as he efficiently built a fire in the small stove, his movements sure and practiced. As warmth began to spread through the cabin, he straightened and dusted off his hands. "There's a lock on the door," he said, pointing to the sturdy bolt, "and I'll be up at the main house if you need anything. Jack and Teddy bunk in the rooms above the barn." "Thank you, Mr. Lawson." "For everything." "Owen," he corrected. "If you're going to be staying at Raven Creek for a while, you might as well call me by my name." "Owen," she repeated softly. "Then you must call me Katherine," he nodded, a slight smile touching his lips. "Good night, Katherine." "Tomorrow will be better, I promise." After he left, Katherine secured the door and explored her new accommodation more thoroughly. The smaller room contained a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a chest of drawers, and a small mirror hanging on the wall. To her surprise, she found fresh linens in the drawers and a cake of soap by the washstand. In the kitchen area, the cupboards held basic supplies: flour, coffee, sugar, salt, along with plates, cups, and utensils. Someone had prepared this cabin for occupation, and recently. Too tired to ponder this mystery further, Katherine washed her face, changed into her nightgown, and slipped into the narrow bed. Despite the strangeness of her surroundings, exhaustion claimed her quickly, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She awoke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the distant sounds of ranch life: the lowing of cattle, the whinny of horses, men's voices calling to one another. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory rushed back, and with it came the reality of her situation. She was alone, disowned, dependent on the charity of a near stranger. And yet, as she rose and dressed in one of her simple day dresses, Katherine felt strangely unburdened. For the first time in her life, there were no expectations pressing down on her, no need to be the perfect daughter, the model of propriety, the example for her younger sister. She was simply Katherine now, free to decide her own path. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found a young woman of perhaps 16 or 17 standing there, a basket over one arm. "Good morning, Miss Zimmerman," the girl said cheerfully. "I'm Lily Torres. I help with the cooking and cleaning up at the main house. Mr. Lawson asked me to bring you some breakfast and show you around the ranch when you're ready." "That's very kind," Katherine replied, opening the door wider to let Lily enter. "And please call me Katherine." Lily set the basket on the table and began unpacking its contents: a loaf of fresh bread, a crock of butter, some sliced ham, boiled eggs, and a jar of preserves. "Mr. Lawson said you might be staying a while to help with the accounts. Is that true? It would be nice to have another woman around." "There's just me and Mrs. Perez, the cook, and she's older than dirt." She clapped a hand over her mouth. "Oh, don't tell her I said that." Katherine couldn't help laughing at the girl's enthusiasm. "Your secret is safe with me. And yes, I may be staying to help with the accounts, although we haven't worked out all the details yet." As they shared the breakfast, Lily chattered about the ranch and its inhabitants. Katherine learned that Owen had owned Raven Creek for 5 years, having purchased it from an aging rancher who had no heirs. Jack Harmon had been with him from the beginning, while Teddy Walsh had joined them only last year. There were 4 other ranch hands: Miguel and Carlos Perez, Mrs. Perez's sons, Daniel Smith, a former Buffalo soldier, and Hank Miller, an old-timer who'd been working cattle since before the war. "Mr. Lawson runs a good operation," Lily said. "Fair pay, decent food, and he doesn't tolerate foolishness. My brother worked here until he got married last year and moved to Sacramento." "And the town?" Katherine asked carefully. "What do people in Sonora think of Mr. Lawson?" Lily considered this while spreading preserves on a slice of bread. "Most respect him, I think. He's honest in his dealings and pays his debts on time. Some of the older families look down their noses because he wasn't born here, and he doesn't attend church regular-like. And there are those who don't approve of him hiring Daniel on account of his color." She shrugged. "But Mr. Lawson doesn't seem to care much what people think." After breakfast, Lily showed Katherine around the ranch. The main house was larger than it had appeared in the moonlight, with a spacious kitchen where Mrs. Perez reigned supreme, a dining room that could seat 12, a comfortable parlor, and a study that Owen used as an office. Upstairs were 5 bedrooms, though according to Lily, Owen was the only one who slept in the house. "The rest are for guests, though we don't get many," she explained. "Mr. Lawson's parents visit once a year from back east, and sometimes his sister comes with her husband and children. The barn was impressive, with stalls for a dozen horses and storage for feed and equipment. Behind it was a bunkhouse where the hands slept, and nearby stood a cookhouse where they took their meals. Several corrals and a small stable completed the central part of the ranch. Beyond stretched pastures where cattle grazed, the land rising gradually toward the foothills. As they walked back toward the cabin, Katherine spotted Owen by the main corral, working with a young horse. He moved with a patient confidence, speaking softly to the animal as it circled nervously around him. Even from a distance, she could see the mutual respect developing between man and beast. "Mr. Lawson has a way with horses," Lily said, following Katherine's gaze. "He breeds and trains them, alongside the cattle operation. Says a good cow pony is worth its weight in gold." Later that afternoon, Owen came to the cabin to discuss Katherine's role at the ranch. She had spent the morning setting the small space to rights and familiarizing herself with the surroundings. Now, sitting across from her at the table, Owen seemed almost hesitant, a stark contrast to his confident demeanor the night before. "I want to be clear about something," he said after accepting a cup of coffee. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need to, whether or not you help with the ranch accounts. I don't want you to feel obligated or trapped." Katherine appreciated his directness. "That's generous, but I'd prefer to earn my keep. I'm a good bookkeeper my father taught me when I was younger, before he decided it wasn't suitable for a lady." She couldn't keep the hint of bitterness from her voice. "Well, I can certainly use the help," Owen admitted. "The ranch has been growing, and the paperwork has gotten beyond what I can manage alongside everything else." They agreed that Katherine would work in Owen's study each morning, organizing the ranch accounts, while her afternoons would be her own. In exchange, she would have the cabin and meals, plus a small stipend for personal needs. "There's one more thing," Owen said as he rose to leave. "Sunday is the fall social in town. Normally, I wouldn't attend, but this year we're hoping to arrange some cattle sales with ranchers from up north. It would help if you came along." Katherine stared at him. "Go back to Sonora after what happened. I can't." "You can," Owen said quietly, "and I think you should. Hiding away will only give credence to Parker's lies. If you walk into that social with your head high, as my guest, it sends a different message." "What message is that?" Katherine asked skeptically. "That you have nothing to be ashamed of, that you're under the protection of Raven Creek Ranch now, and that William Parker is a liar who should watch his step." There was steel beneath Owen's calm tone. Katherine considered his words. The thought of facing the townspeople and her family made her stomach twist with anxiety. But the alternative was to skulk in the shadows, allowing Parker's version of events to stand unchallenged. "All right," she said finally. "I'll go." Over the next few days, Katherine fell into a rhythm at Raven Creek. Mornings were spent in Owen's study, bringing order to the chaotic stacks of invoices, receipts, and ledgers. She discovered that while the ranch was profitable, its financial records were in disarray. Owen clearly had a good head for the practical aspects of ranching but little patience for paperwork. Afternoons, she explored the ranch, gradually becoming familiar with its operations. Sometimes Lily joined her. Other times she walked alone, enjoying the freedom to move about as she pleased. She began learning the names and faces of the ranch hands, who tipped their hats respectfully when she passed. On her third day, she encountered Daniel Smith repairing a fence near the cabin. The former Buffalo soldier worked with efficient movements, his dark hands skilled and sure. "Good afternoon, Mr. Smith," she greeted him. He looked up, surprise briefly crossing his features before he touched the brim of his hat. "Miss Zimmerman, settling in all right?" "Yes, thank you. The cabin is very comfortable," Daniel nodded. I stayed there when I first came to Raven Creek before moving to the bunkhouse. Mr. Lawson thought it might be easier for everyone if I had my own space at first. Katherine understood the unspoken meaning. Even in California, prejudice ran deep. And now, a slight smile touched Daniel's lips. Now I bunk with the rest. Had some rough patches at first with Hank Oldway's Die Hard, but Mr. Lawson made it clear that at Raven Creek, a man is judged by his work, not his color. As the week progressed, Katherine encountered Owen frequently. Sometimes they discussed ranch business. Other times they simply exchanged greetings as they crossed paths. Despite his initial kindness, he kept a certain distance, treating her with respect but revealing little of himself. Still, she found her eyes drawn to him whenever he was nearby, the way he sat a horse as though born to it, the quiet authority he commanded without raising his voice, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. By Sunday morning, Katherine's nerves about returning to Sonora had reached a fever pitch. She'd spent the previous evening washing and pressing her best dress, a deep green wool with black piping that Emma had helped her make last winter. It wasn't fashionable by city standards, but it was the finest thing she owned. A knock at the cabin door startled her from her anxious reflections. When she opened it, she found Owen standing there, freshly shaven and dressed in what was clearly his Sunday best, a dark suit, crisp white shirt, and string tie. His usual hat had been exchanged for a cleaner, less weathered one. In his hands, he held a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Good morning," he said, his eyes taking in her appearance. "You look very nice." "Thank you," Katherine replied, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks. "So do you." He cleared his throat, seeming almost uncomfortable. "I brought you something for today." He held out the package. Curious, Katherine unwrapped it to find a pair of soft leather gloves in a rich brown color. "They're beautiful," she said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I noticed you didn't have any when we rode in," Owen explained. "A lady should have proper gloves for a social." The simple kindness of the gesture nearly undid her composure. After days of maintaining a brave face, Katherine felt dangerously close to tears. "Thank you," she said again, blinking rapidly. "The wagon's ready whenever you are," Owen said, tactfully ignoring her emotional moment. "Take your time." The ride to Sonora was pleasant, the autumn day crisp but sunny. Jack drove the wagon with Owen and Katherine seated behind him. Teddy had stayed behind to oversee the ranch. As they approached town, Katherine's anxiety returned, her hands twisting nervously in her lap despite the new gloves. "Remember," Owen said quietly, "you have nothing to be ashamed of." The social was being held in the large meeting house that served as Sonora's church on Sundays and community gathering place for other events. When they arrived, the festivities were already underway, with tables of food set up outside and music spilling from the open doors. Children ran playing between groups of adults, and the atmosphere was one of general merriment. As Owen helped Katherine down from the wagon, she felt the first curious stares. Conversations paused, heads turned, and whispers began. She forced herself to straighten her spine, remembering Owen's words. "Miss Zimmerman," he said formally, offering his arm. "Shall we?" Taking a deep breath, Katherine placed her gloved hand on his sleeve, and together they walked toward the center of the gathering. Jack followed a few paces behind, his weather-beaten face set in what almost looked like a protective scowl. Owen Lawson. A portly man in a well-cut suit approached them, hand outstretched. "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you avoided these things like a rattlesnake." "Henry," Owen greeted him with a nod. "Special circumstances this year. I'm hoping to meet with the Benson brothers about their Shorethorn bulls." He turned slightly. May I present Miss Katherine Zimmerman? Katherine, this is Henry Douglas, president of the Cattlemen's Association. If Douglas was surprised by Katherine's presence, he hid it well. Miss Zimmerman, a pleasure. I believe I know your father. Yes, Mr. Douglas. He's spoken of you, Katherine replied politely, grateful for the years of social training that allowed her to maintain composure despite her inner turmoil. As they moved through the crowd, more introductions followed. Owen seemed to know everyone of importance in the county, and while there were curious glances and a few whispers, his obvious respect for Katherine seemed to temper any open hostility. That changed when they encountered William Parker near the refreshment table. He was standing with a group of young men, a glass of punch in his hand, and his face darkened when he saw Katherine. "Well, if it isn't the Zimmerman girl making quite a spectacle of herself," he said loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "Didn't take long for her to find a new protector, did it, boys?" Owen's body tensed beside her, but before he could respond, Katherine spoke, her voice clear and steady. "Mr. Parker, I would appreciate it if you would stop spreading falsehoods about me. They reflect poorly on your character, not mine." Parker's face flushed with anger. "You calling me a liar?" "I'm simply stating facts," Katherine replied, her heart pounding but her voice remaining calm. "You know what really happened that day in your father's storeroom, so do I, and so does God. I suggest you consider that before you speak ill of me again." For a moment, Parker seemed taken aback by her directness. Then his eyes narrowed. "You've got nerve, I'll give you that. But you're still—" "I'd think carefully before finishing that sentence," Owen interrupted, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable warning. "Miss Zimmerman is under my protection now, and I take a dim view of anyone who would insult a lady under my care." The two men stared at each other, tension crackling between them. Then Parker's gaze dropped. "Whatever you say, Lawson, but you should know what kind of woman you're defending." "I know exactly what kind of woman Katherine Zimmerman is," Owen replied evenly. "I also know what kind of man speaks ill of a woman to salve his own pride. Come along, Katherine. I believe the Benson brothers have arrived." As they walked away, Katherine released a shaky breath. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't need my help," Owen responded, a note of admiration in his voice. "You handled him perfectly. I just thought I'd save him from further embarrassment." The encounter with Parker seemed to break some invisible barrier. After that, people approached more freely, curiosity overcoming reticence. Katherine found herself engaged in conversation with several of the ranchers' wives, who seemed determined to form their own opinions rather than rely on gossip. It was mid-afternoon when Katherine spotted her family across the gathering. Her father stood rigid in his Sunday suit, pointedly looking everywhere but in her direction. Her mother, beside him, was more conflicted, her eyes darting toward Katherine several times before quickly looking away. Her brothers clustered nearby, uncomfortable but following their father's lead. Only Emma broke ranks, slipping away from the group to hurry toward Katherine when Benjamin Zimmerman was deep in conversation with another church elder. "Kitty," Emma whispered, using the childhood nickname only she was allowed to use. "Oh, I've been so worried. Are you all right? Where are you staying?" Katherine hugged her sister quickly. "I'm fine, Em. I'm staying at Raven Creek Ranch, helping with their accounts." She lowered her voice. "How are things at home?" Emma's face clouded. "Awful. Mother cries when she thinks no one is looking. Father refuses to speak your name, and I'm not allowed to mention you at all." She glanced over her shoulder nervously. "I should go back before he notices, but Kitty, I miss you terribly." "I miss you too," Katherine said, squeezing her sister's hands. "But I'm all right, truly. Mr. Lawson has been very kind." Emma's gaze flicked to where Owen stood a short distance away, deep in conversation with two men who had to be the Benson brothers. "He seems—" Impressive. He's a good man, Katherine said simply. Now go before father sees you. As Emma hurried back to their family, Katherine felt Owen's presence at her shoulder. Your sister? He asked quietly. Yes. Emma, the only one who still acknowledges me, it seems. Owen followed her gaze to where the Zimmerman family stood. Would you like to leave? We can head back to the ranch if this is too difficult. Katherine considered the offer, tempted to escape the whispers and stares. Then she straightened her shoulders. No. I think I'd like to stay a while longer, perhaps even dance if there's music. A smile touched Owen's lips. I believe that can be arranged. As the afternoon turned to early evening, lanterns were lit around the meeting house, and a small band set up in one corner. Couples began to form for dancing, and Katherine found herself unexpectedly enjoying the festivities. She danced with Jack, who proved surprisingly light on his feet for such a gruff man, and with several of the ranchers Owen had introduced her to. When Owen finally claimed a dance, Katherine felt an inexplicable flutter in her stomach. His hand at her waist was warm and steady as he guided her through the steps of a waltz. You dance well for a cowboy, she observed, trying to mask her nervousness with light conversation. My mother insisted all her children learn proper social graces, he replied with a hint of amusement. She would be horrified to know I spend most of my days covered in dust and smelling of cattle. Is your family back east, as Lily mentioned? Owen nodded. Boston. My father is in banking. He had hoped I would join the family business, but I had other ideas. Hence the ranch in California. Hence the ranch, he agreed. Though there were a few stops along the way, the army for a while, then driving cattle up from Texas before I finally had enough saved to buy Raven Creek. As they continued dancing, Katherine became increasingly aware of the warmth of his hand at her waist, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him, the way his blue eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. She had never felt this way before, this heightened awareness, this nervous excitement. It was disconcerting, especially given her precarious position as his employee and tenant. The music ended, and Owen led her from the dance floor toward the refreshment table. As they crossed the room, they passed close to where the Zimmerman family stood. Benjamin Zimmerman's cold gaze fell on Katherine, then shifted to Owen with open hostility. Mr. Lawson, he said stiffly, I see you've taken my daughter under your protection. The implied insult was clear, but Owen's expression remained neutral. Miss Zimmerman is employed at Raven Creek Ranch as our bookkeeper, Mr. Zimmerman. She has her own cabin and is treated with the utmost respect by everyone on my property. Is that what you call it? Benjamin's voice was bitter. A father has a right to protect his family's reputation. You're interfering in matters you don't understand. I understand more than you might think, Owen replied evenly. I understand that a man who would believe a stranger over his own daughter, who would cast her out without means or protection, has a strange definition of fatherly duty. Benjamin's face flushed dark with anger. You dare to judge me? A man who lives beyond the bounds of decent society, who refuses to attend church, who consorts with father, please, Katherine interrupted, unable to bear the public spectacle they were creating. This isn't the place. Elizabeth Zimmerman, who had been silent until now, touched her husband's arm. Benjamin, she murmured, her eyes darting nervously to the onlookers who had begun to take notice of the confrontation. For a moment, it seemed Benjamin might ignore his wife's plea. Then, with a visible effort, he controlled himself. Stay away from my family, Lawson, he said in a low voice. You've already taken one daughter, don't corrupt the rest. With that, he turned abruptly and strode away, Elizabeth following in his wake after casting one last, conflicted glance at Katherine. Emma managed a small, sad smile before she too was pulled along in her parents' orbit. Katherine stood frozen, her father's words ringing in her ears. Taken one daughter, as though she were property to be stolen rather than a person who had been cast out. The injustice of it burned through her shock, kindling a spark of anger. "I apologize for my father's behavior," she said stiffly to Owen. "You have nothing to apologize for," he replied. His face had hardened during the exchange with Benjamin, but now it softened as he looked at her. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said, and was surprised to realize it was true. The encounter had been painful, but she felt oddly liberated by it. Her father's rejection was complete now, leaving no room for false hope or reconciliation fantasies. "I think I'm ready to go home now, though." Only after they were in the wagon heading back to Raven Creek did Katherine realize what she'd said. Home. She had called the ranch home after less than a week. The realization should have been startling, but instead it felt right, like a piece clicking into place. As the days turned into weeks, Katherine settled more deeply into life at Raven Creek. The ranch accounts were gradually brought into order, revealing a healthier financial picture than even Owen had realized. She began expanding her role, taking on correspondence with cattle buyers and suppliers, freeing Owen to focus on the practical aspects of running the ranch. October gave way to November, and the air grew sharper with the approach of winter. Katherine found herself looking forward to mornings in Owen's study, where a fire would be crackling in the grate and coffee would be waiting on the desk. Often Owen would join her for an hour or so, discussing ranch business before heading out to oversee the day's work. These quiet times together became the highlight of her days, though she was careful not to let it show. One morning in mid-November, Katherine arrived at the main house to find Owen already in the study, a letter in his hand and a troubled expression on his face. "Is something wrong?" she asked, setting down her shawl. Owen looked up, seeming to come back from some distant thought. "My parents are coming for Christmas," he said. "Earlier than usual and staying longer, my sister Margaret and her family as well." "That's wonderful," Katherine said, puzzled by his reaction. "Isn't it?" "Yes, of course," he replied quickly. "It's just, my mother can be challenging." Katherine hid a smile. "Is she very proper?" "Disappointed in your choice of profession, all of that," Owen confirmed with a rueful smile. "Plus a determination to see me properly settled before she dies, though she's in excellent health and likely to outlive us all through sheer force of will." "Properly settled," Katherine repeated. "You mean married?" "Exactly. Every visit includes at least one eligible young woman from a good family who happens to be visiting nearby. Last year it was the banker's daughter from Sacramento. The year before, a widow from San Francisco." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Katherine had come to recognize as a sign of agitation. "I love my mother, but her matchmaking efforts are exhausting." Katherine felt a strange twist in her chest at the thought of Owen being matched with some society woman. She ignored it, focusing instead on the practical implications of the visit. "When do they arrive?" she asked, moving to her desk and picking up a ledger. "December 15th. They'll stay through the new year." "Then we should start preparing. Will they stay in the main house?" Owen nodded. "My parents will take the master bedroom, Margaret and her husband one of the guest rooms, and their children the others. We'll need to hire extra help for cooking and cleaning." "I can speak with Mrs. Perez about the cooking," Katherine offered. "And perhaps Lily has friends who could help with the cleaning." "Thank you," Owen said, looking relieved. "You have a gift for organization that I sorely lack." As the conversation turned to other ranch matters, Katherine found herself wondering what Owen's family would make of her. Would they see her as just an employee? Would they have heard rumors about her past? The thought made her uneasy, but she pushed it aside. She had faced worse challenges than disapproving Boston relatives. The preparations for the Lawson family visit occupied much of Katherine's time over the next weeks. The main house was thoroughly cleaned from top to bottom, guest rooms aired and made ready, menus planned, and extra supplies ordered. Owen seemed content to leave most of these arrangements in her hands, grateful to have someone managing the details. As they worked together, Katherine felt a growing closeness between them. It manifested in small ways: the lingering of eyes during conversations, the brush of hands when passing documents, the way Owen had begun to wait for her after dinner so they could walk back to her cabin together, talking about their days. Yet neither of them acknowledged this shifting dynamic. Katherine told herself it was impossible. She was his employee, dependent on his goodwill, and still bearing the shadow of scandal. And Owen maintained a careful respect that, while warm, never crossed the boundary into anything more intimate. The first week of December brought the season's first real snowfall, blanketing Raven Creek in white. Katherine stood on the porch of her cabin that morning, watching the transformed landscape with childlike wonder. In town, snow had always meant shoveled walks and wet hymns. Here, it created a pristine beauty that took her breath away. "Beautiful, isn't it?" She turned to find Owen approaching, his breath visible in the cold air. "It's like something from a painting," she agreed. He came to stand beside her, both of them looking out over the snow-covered pastures. "The cattle will need extra feed until this melts," he said practically. "And we'll need to break ice on the troughs twice a day, but it's worth it for views like this." They stood in companionable silence, watching the sun sparkle on the snow. Then Owen seemed to remember why he'd come. "I have something to ask you," he said, turning to face her. "My family arrives in 10 days, and I'd like you to join us for dinner that first night, as a guest, not as staff." Katherine's surprise must have shown on her face because he hurried to explain. "You've done so much to help prepare for their visit, and you're important to the ranch, to me." The last words came out gruffly, as though they had escaped against his better judgment. "I'd be honored," Katherine said softly. "Thank you, good." Owen seemed both pleased and flustered. "That's good. I should get back to work. The north pasture fence needs checking after the snow." As he walked away, Katherine remained on the porch, watching until he disappeared into the white landscape. "Important to the ranch. To me." The words echoed in her mind, warming her despite the winter chill. The day of the Lawsons' arrival dawned clear and cold. Katherine spent the morning reviewing accounts in the study, but her concentration was poor. Every distant sound had her looking up, expecting to hear carriages arriving. By early afternoon, she gave up any pretense of work and returned to her cabin to prepare for dinner. She had little to wear that would be suitable for dining with Owen's Boston family. After much deliberation, she settled on her green wool dress again, adding a lace collar that Emma had secretly sent her after the fall social. Her hair, usually braided simply for work, she arranged in a more elaborate style, pinning the rich brown waves into a neat chignon. As dusk fell, she heard the sound of carriages, followed by voices and movement at the main house. Taking a deep breath to calm her nerves, Katherine wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped out into the cold evening air. The main house blazed with light, every window glowing warmly against the deepening blue of the winter sky. As she approached, the front door opened and Owen stepped out, clearly watching for her. "You look lovely," he said as she reached the porch steps. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. "Is everyone here?" "Yes, just settled in. My mother is already rearranging the furniture in the parlor." There was exasperated affection in his tone. He offered his arm, and Katherine placed her hand on it, feeling the solid strength beneath the fine material of his suit. Together they entered the house, where voices and laughter could be heard from the parlor. "Owen, darling, please tell me you have proper crystals somewhere in this wilderness," called a cultured female voice. "These glasses are positively barbaric." "Coming, mother," Owen replied with a sigh. Then to Katherine, ready to face the lions, she squeezed his arm slightly. "Lead on." The parlor was filled with people, all of them wearing clothes that spoke of wealth and city life. An elegant woman in her 60s, silver streaking her dark hair, was examining the glassware on a side table with a critical eye. A distinguished-looking gentleman of similar age stood by the fireplace, deep in conversation with a younger man. A pretty woman who strongly resembled Owen was directing two children in putting away their toys, while a baby slept in a portable bassinet nearby. "Ah, here he is," the older woman said as they entered. "Owen, these glasses simply won't do for Christmas dinner. Surely you have something better hidden away." Her sharp eyes moved to Katherine. "And who is this?" Owen straightened slightly, his voice taking on a formal tone. "Mother, father, Margaret May, I present Miss Katherine Zimmerman. Katherine manages the ranch accounts and has been instrumental in preparing for your visit." "How do you do, Miss Zimmerman?" said Owen's father, stepping forward to bow slightly. "Richard Lawson. This is my wife, Beatrice, our daughter Margaret, her husband James Bradford, and their children Richard, Elizabeth, and little Henry in the bassinet." Katherine curtsied. "It's a pleasure to meet you all. Welcome to Raven Creek." Beatrice Lawson's gaze was appraising as it swept over Katherine, taking in every detail of her appearance. "Miss Zimmerman, how interesting. Owen didn't mention that his bookkeeper was a young lady. I had pictured someone more mature." "Katherine is extremely competent," Owen said firmly. "The ranch accounts have never been in better order." "I'm sure," Beatrice murmured, in a tone that suggested she was sure of nothing of the kind. "And you live?" "I have a cabin on the property," Katherine replied, keeping her voice even. "I see." Beatrice's eyebrows rose slightly. "How unconventional," Margaret Bradford intervened, stepping forward with a warm smile. "Don't mind Mother, Miss Zimmerman. She believes anything west of Philadelphia is uncivilized territory. I, for one, am delighted to meet you. Owen's letters have mentioned your contributions to Raven Creek quite favorably." "He has." Katherine glanced at Owen in surprise. "Indeed," said Richard Lawson, rejoining the conversation. "He wrote that ranch productivity has increased 20% since you reorganized the operation schedules." "Quite impressive." Katherine felt a warm glow at this unexpected praise. "Mr. Lawson is too generous. The men do the real work. I just help keep track of it." "False modesty is unnecessary, Katherine," Owen said. "You've transformed how we do business." The conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Perez announcing that dinner was served. In the dining room, Katherine found herself seated between Owen and his father, with Beatrice directly across from her. The table was beautifully set, with the ranch's best china and silverware gleaming in the light of the chandelier. As the meal progressed, Katherine gradually relaxed. Richard Lawson proved to be a thoughtful conversationalist, genuinely interested in the ranch operations. Margaret asked intelligent questions about life in California, while her husband James discussed the changing cattle markets knowledgeably with Owen. Only Beatrice maintained a cool reserve, her questions to Katherine just slightly too pointed, her observations just barely within the bounds of politeness. When she learned that Katherine had grown up in Sonora, her eyebrows rose again. "A local girl, then. And your family? What do they do?" "My father is a carpenter," Katherine replied evenly. "He builds furniture mostly, though he's also worked on many of the buildings in town." "How rustic," Beatrice murmured. "And they're supportive of your unusual living arrangement here." There was a momentary pause as everyone at the table seemed to sense the tension beneath the question. Katherine felt Owen stiffen beside her. "Mother," he began, a warning in his voice. "It's all right," Katherine interrupted softly. She met Beatrice's gaze directly. "My family and I are estranged, Mrs. Lawson. A disagreement that couldn't be reconciled. Your son kindly offered me employment when I had few options." Beatrice's expression shifted, something like genuine curiosity replacing the studied disdain. "I see. That does sound like Owen. Always taking in strays." "Katherine is not a stray," Owen said firmly. "She's a valued member of the Raven Creek family." The use of the word family seemed to startle everyone at the table. Richard Lawson's eyebrows rose. Margaret hid a smile behind her napkin, and Beatrice's gaze sharpened with sudden interest as it moved between Owen and Katherine. The conversation turned to other topics after that, but Katherine remained acutely aware of Beatrice's speculative glances throughout the remainder of the meal. Later, as she prepared to leave, Owen walked her to the door. "I apologize for my mother," he said quietly. "She can be difficult." "She's protective of you," Katherine replied. "I understand that." Owen looked surprised. "That's generous considering her behavior." "She loves you," Katherine said simply. "That's clear in everything she does, even the meddling. It's more than some people have." The thought of her own mother, who had allowed Katherine to be cast out without a word of protest, brought a momentary pang. She pushed it aside, focusing instead on the present moment. "Will I see you tomorrow?" Owen asked, his voice softening. "Of course. The accounts won't manage themselves." "That's not what I meant." His blue eyes were serious in the dim light of the entryway. Katherine felt a flutter in her chest. "I know." For a moment they stood in silence, something unspoken hovering between them. Then the parlor door opened, spilling light into the hallway. "Owen." "Are you coming back in?" Beatrice called. The moment broken, Owen stepped back. "Good night, Katherine." "Good night, Owen." As she walked back to her cabin through the crisp night air, Katherine found herself thinking about families, the one she had lost and perhaps the one she might someday find. The days leading up to Christmas were filled with activity at Raven Creek. The main house was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, under Beatrice's exacting direction. Katherine continued her regular duties, but found herself increasingly involved in the holiday preparations as well, often at Margaret's insistence. "You have much better taste than Mother," Margaret confided as they arranged holly on the mantelpiece. "She'd have this place looking like a Boston drawing room if we let her. This suits the ranch much better." Katherine was surprised to find herself enjoying Margaret's company. Owen's sister had her mother's sharp wit but none of her snobbery, and she seemed genuinely interested in Katherine's life at Raven Creek. "Owen writes about you, you know," Margaret said casually one afternoon as they wrapped small gifts for the ranch hands. "Not in the obvious ways, he's too careful for that, but I can read between the lines." Miss Zimmerman suggested this, or Katherine implemented that, always with that underlying tone of admiration. Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "He's been very kind to me." "Kind isn't the word I'd choose," Margaret replied with a knowing smile. "But we'll let that pass for now." Beatrice, meanwhile, had progressed from thinly veiled disdain to a sort of wary curiosity about Katherine. She asked questions about Katherine's education, her interests, her opinions on various topics, as though conducting an assessment. "You're well-read for someone with your background," she observed one evening after Katherine had contributed to a discussion about a recent novel. "My mother believed in education for girls," Katherine replied, "and we had a good lending library in Sonora." Beatrice nodded thoughtfully. Intelligence and a thirst for knowledge can overcome many disadvantages in life. It wasn't exactly warm approval. but it was the closest thing to a compliment that Beatrice had offered. Owen himself seemed caught between pleasure at having his family around and frustration with his mother's transparent attempts to understand his relationship with Katherine. More than once, Katherine caught him watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice, his expression unreadable. 2 days before Christmas, a letter arrived for Katherine. The handwriting on the envelope was instantly recognizable as Emma's, and Katherine took it to her cabin to read in private. Inside was news that made her hands tremble. William Parker had been caught attempting to assault a girl who worked at the milliner's shop. This time, there had been witnesses, and Parker's father had been unable to hush up the incident. The Parkers had hastily left town, reportedly for San Francisco. More shocking still was the postscript. "Father has been asking about you. Not directly, he's too proud for that, but I've heard him asking Mr. Douglas if he's seen you at the Lawson Ranch." Mother cried when she heard about the Parkers leaving town. "I think she finally believes you were telling the truth. Maybe with time they might be willing to reconcile. I miss you terribly, Kitty. Merry Christmas. Love." Emma. Katherine sat for a long time with the letter in her hands, conflicting emotions washing over her. Vindication, certainly, that Parker's true nature had been revealed. Relief that others hadn't suffered worse at his hands, but reconciliation with her family. She wasn't sure how she felt about that prospect. They had cast her out when she needed them most. Could she forgive that betrayal, even if they were willing to acknowledge their mistake? That evening she sought out Owen, finding him in the stable checking on a mare that was due to foal in the spring. She showed him the letter without comment, watching his face as he read it. "Parker got what was coming to him," he said when he finished, handing the letter back. "Though not nearly enough, in my opinion." He studied her face in the lantern light. "How do you feel about the rest? Your family?" Katherine leaned against a stall door, gathering her thoughts. "I don't know. Part of me wants to say it's too late, that they made their choice. But another part misses them." Owen finished softly. She nodded. "Emma especially. And my mother, despite everything. Even my father." She trailed off, unable to articulate the complex emotions she felt toward the man who had rejected her so completely. "Family is complicated," Owen said, moving to stand beside her. "Look at me and my mother. She drives me to distraction, but I still love her, still want her approval, even at my age." "Do you think I should try to reconcile with them?" Katherine asked, genuinely uncertain. Owen was quiet for a moment, considering. "I can't answer that for you, but I will say this: forgiveness isn't just for them. It's for you too, carrying anger and hurt. It's a heavy burden." Katherine looked up at him, struck by the wisdom in his words. "When did you get so insightful, Owen Lawson?" A smile touched his lips. "I spend a lot of time with cattle. Gives a man space to think." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the soft nickering of horses and the distant lowing of cattle in the night. Without conscious thought, Katherine found herself leaning slightly against Owen's solid presence, drawing comfort from his warmth in the chilly stable. "Whatever you decide," he said finally, "you have a place here. You should know that." "Thank you," she whispered, her heart full. Christmas Eve arrived with a fresh dusting of snow and a festive air that permeated even the working parts of the ranch. The hands were given a half-day, with Mrs. Perez preparing a special dinner for them in the cookhouse. At the main house, the Lawson family gathered for their own celebrations, and Katherine was included as a matter of course. The children were the center of attention, their excitement infectious as they hung stockings and placed cookies for Santa Claus. Young Richard, at 6, maintained a worldly skepticism about Santa that fooled no one, while 4-year-old Elizabeth believed wholeheartedly in the magic of Christmas. Miss Katherine, Elizabeth said solemnly as they sat by the fire after dinner. "Do you think Santa will find us all the way out here? Uncle Owen's house is very far from everywhere." "I'm quite certain he will," Katherine assured her. "Santa has a special map that shows him where all good children are sleeping, no matter how remote the location. Even in California," Elizabeth pressed, clearly concerned about this point. "Especially in California," Katherine said firmly. "The reindeer particularly enjoy visiting warmer climates during their long night of work." This explanation seemed to satisfy Elizabeth, who nodded sagely before running off to double-check her stocking placement. Owen, who had been listening nearby, moved to take her vacated spot on the sofa. "You're good with children," he observed. "I had lots of practice with Emma when she was small," Katherine replied. "And I used to help with the Sunday school at church." Something in her voice must have betrayed her momentary sadness at the reminder of her former life, because Owen's expression softened. "Christmas can be difficult when you're separated from family," he said quietly. Katherine managed a smile. "I'm fortunate to be here with your family. They've been very welcoming." She glanced across the room to where Beatrice was showing Margaret something in a small jewelry box. "Well, most of them. Even Mother is warming to you," Owen said. "She actually complimented your needlework to me yesterday." For Beatrice Lawson, that's practically a declaration of undying affection. Katherine laughed, the sound drawing Beatrice's gaze momentarily. The older woman's expression was thoughtful as she observed her son and Katherine sitting close together by the fire. "I have something for you," Owen said suddenly. "For Christmas, but I'd like to give it to you privately." He glanced around the crowded parlor. "Perhaps tomorrow after the family celebration." "I have something for you as well," Katherine admitted. She had spent evenings embroidering handkerchiefs with his initials, a simple gift, but one she'd put her heart into. Tomorrow would be perfect. Christmas Day dawned bright and clear, the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a glittering wonderland. The Lawsons began their celebration early, with the children waking everyone at dawn to open presents. Katherine joined them for breakfast, then participated in the gift exchange. To her surprise, there were several packages with her name on them: a beautiful shawl from Margaret and James, a leather-bound journal from Richard, and even a pair of fine gloves from Beatrice, accompanied by a card that read simply, "Every lady needs proper accessories." Owen's gift wasn't among them, confirming their private arrangement. Katherine found herself anticipating their meeting with a nervous excitement that she tried not to examine too closely. The day passed in a blur of food, laughter, and holiday cheer. In the late afternoon, when the family had settled into that peaceful lull that follows Christmas dinner, Owen caught Katherine's eye and nodded slightly toward the door. She waited a few minutes before following him out, retrieving her gift from where she'd hidden it in the study. She found him waiting on the porch, a small package in his hands. The winter sun was beginning to set, painting the snow-covered hills in hues of pink and gold. "Shall we walk?" he suggested. "It's not too cold and I could use some fresh air after all that food." They strolled through the ranch yard and beyond, following a path that had been cleared earlier in the day. The snow crunched beneath their boots, and their breath formed small clouds in the air. They didn't speak at first, content to enjoy the beauty of the winter landscape and each other's company. Eventually, they reached a small rise that overlooked the entire ranch, the main house with smoke curling from its chimneys, the barn and outbuildings, the snow-covered pastures stretching toward the distant hills. It was breathtakingly beautiful in the golden light of the setting sun. "This is my favorite view of Raven Creek," Owen said, stopping to look out over his domain. "I come here sometimes when I need to think, to remind myself why I left Boston and everything that was expected of me. It's beautiful, Katherine said softly. I can see why you love it. I do love it, he agreed. But I've come to realize that land and buildings, cattle and horses, they're not enough to make a home. A true home needs something more. There was something in his voice that made Katherine turn to look at him directly. His blue eyes were serious, his expression open in a way she'd rarely seen. "What does it need?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Love," he said simply. "Family, someone to share it with." The weight of his words hung in the air between them, full of unspoken meaning. Katherine's heart beat faster as Owen turned to face her fully. "I'd like to give you your Christmas gift now," he said, holding out the small package wrapped in silver paper. With slightly trembling fingers, Katherine unwrapped it to reveal a small velvet box. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was a ring, a delicate gold band set with a single perfect pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my grandmother's," Owen said, his voice husky. "My mother brought it with her, though I didn't know until yesterday. She said she thought I might have need of it on this trip." Katherine stared at the ring, then up at Owen, her heart in her throat. "Owen." "I love you, Katherine," he said simply. "I think I began falling in love with you that first night in the saloon, when you faced down the entire town with your head high. Every day since then has only deepened my feelings." He took a deep breath. "I know it hasn't been long, and if you need time to consider—" "Yes," Katherine interrupted, tears of joy filling her eyes. Owen blinked, looking momentarily taken aback. "Yes, you need time." "No," she laughed through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you. I love you too, Owen. I have for months now, though I hardly dared admit it to myself." The smile that broke across Owen's face was like the sun emerging from clouds. He took the ring from the box and slipped it onto her finger, where it fit perfectly. Then he drew her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with the passion of feelings too long restrained. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "You've made me the happiest man in California," he murmured. "And I'm the happiest woman," Katherine replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Only then did she remember her own gift, which seemed insignificant now. "I almost forgot," she said, somewhat shyly offering the small package. "It's not much compared to—" Owen unwrapped the handkerchiefs, his expression softening as he examined the careful stitches, the elegant OL embroidered in each corner. "They're perfect," he said, genuine appreciation in his voice. "Made by your hands, which makes them more valuable than anything money could buy." As the last light of Christmas Day faded from the sky, they walked back to the ranch hand in hand, stopping occasionally to share kisses that grew increasingly difficult to end. By the time they reached the main house, stars were appearing overhead and lights blazed from the windows. "Are you ready to tell them?" Owen asked, gesturing toward the house where his family waited. Katherine smiled, squeezing his hand. "More than ready." The announcement of their engagement was met with varying reactions. Margaret squealed with delight and immediately embraced Katherine as a sister. Richard offered warm congratulations and a knowing smile that suggested he'd anticipated this outcome. The children were excited at the prospect of a wedding, though young Elizabeth was primarily concerned with whether she could be a flower girl. Beatrice's reaction was the most surprising. After a moment of stunned silence, she rose from her chair and crossed to where Katherine stood nervously by Owen's side. "I suspected this might be coming," she said, her aristocratic features composed. "Though I admit it's happened rather more quickly than I expected." "Mother," Owen began, a warning note in his voice. Beatrice held up a hand. "Allow me to finish, Owen." She turned her attention back to Katherine. "When I arrived, I thought you might be another of my son's charitable projects, a young woman in need given employment out of kindness. I've since come to understand that you are far more than that. You are intelligent, capable, and clearly devoted to both this ranch and my son." She paused, studying Katherine's face. "Most importantly, I've seen the way Owen looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. I've never seen that expression on his face before in all his 28 years. Her voice softened slightly. "My son deserves happiness, Miss Zimmerman. If you are the one who brings it to him, then you have my blessing." With that, she leaned forward and kissed Katherine lightly on the cheek, a gesture so unexpected that Katherine felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Lawson," she managed to say. "I believe, under the circumstances, you should call me Beatrice," Owen's mother replied with the ghost of a smile. "Or Mother, if you prefer, though perhaps that can wait until after the wedding." The remainder of the Lawsons' visit passed in a whirlwind of wedding planning and celebration. The date was set for June, when the weather would be fair and the ranch work less demanding. Katherine found herself drawn fully into the family circle, no longer an employee but a bride-to-be, the future mistress of Raven Creek. On New Year's Eve, as the family gathered to welcome 1874, Katherine slipped away from the festivities to stand on the porch for a moment of quiet reflection. The year that was ending had brought the greatest pain and the greatest joy of her life: rejection by her birth family, but acceptance into a new one; the loss of her reputation in town, but the finding of her true self at Raven Creek. Owen found her there, as she had known he would. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against his solid warmth. "Any regrets?" he asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. Katherine turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "Not one," she said truthfully. "Every step, even the painful ones, led me here to you. How could I regret that?" he smiled, bending to kiss her as the first shouts of "Happy New Year" rang out from inside the house. "To new beginnings," he murmured against her lips. "To love," she answered, and kissed him again as the old year slipped away and the new one, full of promise, began. In the months that followed, Katherine's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined that fateful night in the rusty Spur saloon. Spring came early to the foothills, bringing new life to Raven Creek: calves in the pastures, foals in the stables, and wildflowers carpeting the hills. The wedding preparations continued, with Margaret sending packages from Boston containing fabric samples and fashion plates. Beatrice wrote weekly letters full of advice and opinions, which Katherine received with more amusement than annoyance, recognizing the acceptance they represented. In April, Katherine received another letter, this one bearing her father's distinctive handwriting. With trembling fingers, she opened it, Owen at her side providing silent support. Benjamin Zimmerman's words were formal, even stiff, but beneath them lay a current of regret that was unmistakable. He acknowledged that he had been wrong to believe William Parker over his own daughter. He explained, though did not excuse, that his concern for the family's reputation had blinded him to the truth. And he asked, with painful awkwardness, if Katherine would be willing to meet with him and Elizabeth to discuss a possible reconciliation. "What will you do?" Owen asked after she had read the letter aloud. Katherine folded the paper carefully, her emotions too complex to easily name. "I think I'd like to meet with them. Not to return to how things were, that's impossible now, but perhaps to forge something new, something honest." Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Would you like me to come with you, please?" she said simply. "I'd feel stronger with you there." The meeting took place on a Sunday afternoon in late April, at a small cafe in Sonora that would provide neutral ground. Katherine arrived on Owen's arm, her heart racing but her head held high. She wore a new dress of blue silk, a gift from Owen, and her pearl engagement ring caught the light as she removed her glove. Benjamin and Elizabeth Zimmerman were already seated, both looking older than Katherine remembered from just months ago. Her father rose as they approached, his movements stiff with more than physical age. "Katherine," he said, his voice gruff, "thank you for coming." "Father," she replied with a slight nod. "Mother." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Katherine," she whispered, "you look so beautiful." The initial conversation was awkward, filled with careful pleasantries and long pauses. But gradually, as tea was served and the first tension eased, real communication began to emerge. Elizabeth spoke of her regret at not defending Katherine, explaining that she had believed her daughter but had lacked the courage to stand against her husband. Benjamin, with visible difficulty, acknowledged his pride and stubbornness, his fear of scandal and his failure as a father. "I was wrong," he said finally, the words clearly costing him greatly. "I should have believed you, should have protected you. I failed in the most fundamental duty of a father, and for that I can only ask your forgiveness, though I don't deserve it." Katherine felt tears well in her eyes. "I was so angry," she admitted, "so hurt. For a long time I didn't think I could ever forgive you." She took a deep breath. "But I've learned something important in these past months. Holding on to anger only hurts the person who carries it." She reached across the table, taking her mother's hand in her left and her father's in her right. "I forgive you both. I don't forget, and things can never be exactly as they were before, but I would like to try to build something new if you're willing." Elizabeth's tears spilled over, and even Benjamin's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "We would like that very much," her mother said, squeezing Katherine's hand. The conversation turned then to Katherine's engagement. To her surprise, her father already knew about it. "Word travels in a small town," he said with a hint of his old dryness. "I made inquiries about Mr. Lawson after we heard. He has a reputation as an honorable man, a fair employer, a good rancher." Owen, who had been quietly supportive throughout the meeting, inclined his head slightly. "Thank you, sir." "Will you come to the wedding?" Katherine asked, hardly daring to hope. "Both of you, and Emma, of course." Elizabeth looked to Benjamin, who nodded slowly. "We would be honored," he said formally. Then, with an effort that was visible, "I would very much like to walk my daughter down the aisle if she would permit it." Katherine's heart swelled with a complex mixture of emotions, not the simple love and trust she had once felt for her father, but something more mature, more measured, yet still genuine. "I would like that too, father." As they prepared to leave, Benjamin cleared his throat awkwardly. "Katherine, there is one more thing. Your dowry. I've set aside money for each of my daughter's marriages. Yours is waiting at the bank whenever you're ready." "That isn't necessary," Owen began, but Katherine placed a hand on his arm. "Thank you, father," she said simply. "Not for the money itself, but for what it represents." Outside the cafe, they parted with cautious embraces and promises to meet again soon. As Owen and Katherine rode back toward Raven Creek, she felt lighter, as though a weight she hadn't fully acknowledged had been lifted from her shoulders. "Are you all right?" Owen asked, studying her profile. "Yes," she said, and meant it. "Better than all right, I feel. Whole again in a way I haven't since that day in October." She turned to smile at him, and excited about our future. "As am I," he replied, reaching across to take her hand. "As am I." The June wedding was everything Katherine could have wished for. It took place at Raven Creek, with an arbor set up in the meadow where wildflowers still bloomed in profusion. Guests came from Sonora and surrounding ranches, as well as from Boston. The Lawsons had returned for the occasion. along with other friends and relatives from back east. Katherine wore a gown of ivory silk that Margaret had helped design, with a veil of delicate lace that had belonged to Owen's grandmother. As promised, Benjamin Zimmerman walked his daughter down the improvised aisle, his face solemn but proud. Elizabeth and Emma watched with happy tears, while Beatrice Lawson sat regally beside her husband, nodding approval at the elegant arrangements. The ranch hands had decorated the barn for the celebration that followed, transforming the utilitarian space with flowers, ribbons, and lanterns. Tables groaned with food prepared by Mrs. Perez and her helpers, and a small band played for dancing that continued well into the night. As evening fell, Owen led Katherine away from the festivities to the same hilltop where he had proposed. "Happy, Mrs. Lawson?" he asked, drawing her into his arms. "Deliriously so, Mr. Lawson," she replied, lifting her face for his kiss. They stood together, looking out over their kingdom, the ranch lights twinkling in the gathering dusk, the sounds of music and laughter floating up from below, the vast beauty of the California landscape stretching around them. "I never imagined this," Katherine said softly. "That night in October when my family turned their backs on me, I thought my life was over. I never dreamed it was just beginning." Owen's arms tightened around her. "Sometimes the end of one path is just the start of a better one. You taught me that, Katherine. Before you came, Raven Creek was just a place, a business. Now it's a home." "Our home," she agreed, leaning into his embrace as the first stars appeared overhead. In the years that followed, Raven Creek flourished under their joint stewardship. Katherine's financial acumen, combined with Owen's practical ranching knowledge, created an operation that became the envy of the county. They expanded thoughtfully, adding land when it became available, improving their breeding stock, and investing in new techniques that increased productivity. Their personal happiness grew as well. A year after their wedding, Katherine gave birth to a son whom they named James Richard after both their fathers. A daughter, Emma Elizabeth, followed 2 years later, and another son, Daniel, 2 years after that. The children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, growing strong and confident under their parents' loving guidance. Katherine's relationship with her birth family continued to heal, though it was never without certain boundaries. Benjamin and Elizabeth visited Raven Creek regularly, taking genuine delight in their grandchildren. Emma married a young doctor from Sacramento and often brought her own children to play with Katherine's. Beatrice Lawson, to everyone's surprise, became Katherine's staunch advocate in Boston society, telling anyone who would listen about her remarkable daughter-in-law who helped run one of California's most successful ranches. She and Richard continued their annual visits, though Beatrice complained dramatically about the journey each time. On a warm evening in the summer of 1883, 10 years after that fateful night at the Rusty Spur, Owen and Katherine sat on the porch of the main house, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the hills. James, at 9, was showing 7-year-old Emma how to throw a lasso, while 5-year-old Daniel supervised with the serious expression he often wore. "They're growing so fast," Katherine remarked, leaning her head against Owen's shoulder. "Too fast," he agreed, his arm around her waist. "James is already talking about which horse will be his when he's old enough to work cattle." "Like his father," Katherine smiled. "Though I hope he inherits my head for figures. One mathematically challenged Lawson in the family is enough." Owen laughed, the sound still having the power to warm her heart after all these years. "You're never going to let me forget that time I miscalculated the cattle sale and thought we'd lost money, are you?" "Never," she confirmed, turning to kiss his cheek. "Just as you'll never let me forget the time I tried to make biscuits and nearly burned down the kitchen." We make a good team, Owen said, suddenly serious. Complementary strengths. We do, Katherine agreed softly. The best team. As dusk deepened into night and the children were called in for bed, Katherine thought back to that October evening when everything had changed. She remembered the despair she had felt standing alone on Sonora's main street, the fear as she pushed through the saloon doors, and then the moment when Owen had looked up and simply said, "Sit with us." Such a small thing, that invitation. Such a simple act of kindness. Yet it had changed the course of two lives, had created the family that now filled Raven Creek with love and laughter. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked as they stood to go inside, the children already racing ahead. Katherine smiled up at the man who had been her rescuer, her employer, her friend, and finally her beloved husband. "I'm thinking about how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best ones. How losing what I thought I needed brought me to what I truly wanted." She reached up to touch his face, still handsome after all these years. "I'm thinking how grateful I am that you opened your table to a desperate young woman on a dark night 10 years ago." Owen caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Best decision I ever made," he said simply. Hand in hand, they walked into their home, closing the door on the gathering night, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, a family forged not from obligation or expectation, but from choice, from kindness, and from love.